Welcome to Revenge Stories Hub. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on your notification. My name is Marcus Webb, and I spent 3 years watching my stepmother destroy everything my father built. She fired me exactly 1 week after his funeral, standing in his office like she owned it, wearing the cold smile I'd learned to recognize as danger. "We're restructuring," Victoria said, her red nails tapping against the mahogany desk my father had imported from Italy. "Your position is no longer necessary." I didn't argue. I didn't cry or beg like she expected. I just nodded, packed my desk, and walked out of Webb Industries with a cardboard box and a secret she would never see coming. My father had been teaching me since I was 16, preparing me for this exact moment, building a safety net Victoria didn't know existed. She thought she'd won by marrying him 5 years ago, by convincing him to put her on the board, by slowly pushing me to the side. What she didn't know was that my father saw her coming from the beginning, and he'd spent those 5 years making absolutely sure she could never take what was rightfully mine. As I drove away from the building that day, my phone buzzed with a calendar reminder I'd set 3 years earlier. It simply said, "Execute plan." I smiled for the first time in weeks. My father, Thomas Webb, built Webb Industries from nothing. He started in our garage when I was 5, designing security software for small businesses. By the time I was 12, he had government contracts. By 15, we had offices in 4 countries. I grew up in boardrooms, learning coding languages before I learned to drive, understanding profit margins before I understood algebra. Dad never treated me like a kid when it came to business. He treated me like his successor, his partner, his legacy. Then came Victoria. I was 22 when they met at a charity gala. She was 38, elegant, smart, and ambitious in ways that made my instincts scream warnings my father refused to hear. "Marcus, I'm lonely," he told me when I questioned the relationship. "Your mother's been gone 8 years. Victoria understands the business world. She's not after my money," but I saw how she looked at financial reports instead of at him. I noticed how she studied our company structure like she was memorizing a map. When they married 6 months later, I tried to be happy for him, but something cold settled in my chest and never left. The first year of their marriage was quiet. Victoria played the supportive wife perfectly, attending events, hosting dinners, asking intelligent questions about our projects. Dad seemed happier than he'd been in years. I almost believed I'd been wrong about her, almost convinced myself my protective instincts were just fear of change. Then Dad made her vice president of operations. That's when everything shifted. Suddenly, decisions I'd been making for years needed her approval. Projects I developed were being questioned, delayed, sometimes killed entirely. "She's finding her footing," Dad said when I expressed concern. "Give her time, Marcus. She's trying to help," but help wasn't what she was doing. She was building a power base carefully, methodically, recruiting board members to her side, making herself essential to operations, positioning herself as the voice of reason while painting me as the inexperienced son riding on Daddy's coattails. By year 2, I'd been moved from chief technical officer to a vague special projects director role that meant absolutely nothing. Dad noticed my frustration, but misread it as resistance to change rather than recognition of a threat. Everything changed the night Dad called me to his study at home. It was late, past midnight, and his voice on the phone carried a weight I'd never heard before. When I arrived, he looked older than his 55 years, tired in a way that scared me. "I need to show you something," he said, pulling out a locked file box I'd never seen. Inside were documents, dozens of them, all meticulously organized. Stock certificates, trust documents, corporate filings, all dated within the last 6 months. "I made a mistake marrying her without a prenuptial agreement," he said quietly. "But I'm not a fool, Marcus. I've been watching. I see what she's doing." My heart hammered as he explained. Victoria had been slowly consolidating power, building alliances, positioning herself to take control if anything happened to him. She'd even approached to board members about voting Dad out as CEO, claiming his health was failing and his judgment was compromised. "Is your health failing?" I asked, throat tight. He smiled subtly. No, but she's laying groundwork for something, and I won't let her have what I built for you. That night, Dad laid out a plan that would take 3 years to execute. The core of it was simple but brilliant. We would create a shell structure of holding companies and trusts that technically owned all of web industry's actual assets. The company itself, the entity where Victoria had board position and influence, would become essentially an empty vessel. All intellectual property, all patents, all actual valuable assets would be transferred to a private trust with me as the sole beneficiary. Victoria would be left controlling a company that owned nothing but debt and operational expenses. It has to be slow, Dad explained. We can't trigger her suspicion or the board's. Each transfer has to look like normal corporate restructuring, tax optimization, standard business practice over the next 3 years. We moved assets piece by piece. Every patent, every proprietary algorithm, every piece of valuable intellectual property was quietly transferred to holding companies owned by the Marcus Webb Family Trust. The trust had been established when I was born, but Dad had kept it minimal until now. Suddenly, it became the actual owner of everything that made web industries valuable. During those 3 years, I played my part perfectly. I let Victoria push me aside, let her diminish my role, let everyone think I was the disappointing son who couldn't live up to his father's legacy. It hurt watching colleagues I'd worked with for years start treating me like I was irrelevant, watching Victoria's smug satisfaction as she slowly erased me from the company. But Dad and I had weekly secret meetings, usually at his attorney's office, sometimes at a cabin he owned upstate that Victoria didn't know about. We tracked every asset transfer, documented every step, made sure the legal structure was absolutely bulletproof. She fight this, I said during one meeting. When she finds out, she claimed fraud or manipulation or something. Dad nodded. That's why every transfer is legitimate, properly filed, reviewed by 3 different law firms. Every document is clean. She has no legal grounds because we're not doing anything illegal. We're just restructuring our corporate assets, which is my right as founder and majority shareholder. His confidence reassured me, but I could see the toll this was taking on him. The stress of living with someone he no longer trusted, of maintaining a marriage that was really just a strategic position. It was wearing him down. Dad died on a Tuesday morning in April. Heart attack in his study, sudden and massive. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. I got the call from Victoria, her voice perfectly pitched between grief and shock. But I heard something else underneath, something that sounded almost like relief. The funeral was enormous. Dad had been respected in the tech community, beloved by employees, feared by competitors. Hundreds of people came to pay respects. Victoria played the devastated widow flawlessly, dabbing her eyes with a black handkerchief, accepting condolences with graceful sorrow. I stood separate from her, accepting my own condolences, feeling numb and hollow and angry. He was only 58. We should have had decades more. During the reception, I caught Victoria on her phone several times, texting rapidly, her face focused and sharp when she thought no one was watching. She was already planning her next move. I knew because I'd seen that look before, right before she made power plays at the company. She was calculating, strategizing, preparing to seize control now that the only person who could stop her was gone. What she didn't know was that Dad had prepared for even this possibility. The will reading happened 5 days after the funeral. Victoria insisted on having it at the company's conference room rather than the attorney's office, wanting to project power and control. Our family attorney, Bernard Hayes, was a man in his 70s who'd known Dad since the company's founding. He'd also been instrumental in setting up the trust structure, though Victoria had no idea of his involvement. The conference room was packed. Victoria sat at the head of the table, like she already owned everything. Her 2 sisters were there, vultures hoping for scraps. Several board members attended, curious about the company's future. I sat quietly in the corner, watching everyone, saying nothing. Bernard began reading. The personal items were straightforward. the house to Victoria, Dad's car collection split between various people, charitable donations to his favorite causes. Then came the business assets. To my wife, Victoria Webb, I leave my position as CEO of Webb Industries. Along with my voting shares and board seat, Victoria's smile was triumphant. She'd won. Several board members nodded approvingly. Her sisters whispered congratulations. I remained still, waiting. Bernard wasn't finished. The will reading happened 5 days after the funeral. Victoria insisted on having it at the company's conference room rather than the attorney's office, wanting to project power and control. Our family attorney, Bernard Hayes, was a man in his 70s who'd known Dad since the company's founding. He'd also been instrumental in setting up the trust structure, though Victoria had no idea of his involvement. The conference room was packed. Victoria sat at the head of the table like she already owned everything. Her 2 sisters were there, vultures hoping for scraps. Several board members attended, curious about the company's future. I sat quietly in the corner, watching everyone, saying nothing. Bernard began reading. The personal items were straightforward. The house to Victoria, Dad's car collection split between various people, charitable donations to his favorite causes. Then came the business assets. To my wife, Victoria Webb, I leave my position as CEO of Webb Industries. Along with my voting shares and board seat, Victoria's smile was triumphant. She'd won. Several board members nodded approvingly. Her sisters whispered congratulations. I remained still, waiting. Bernard wasn't finished. However, Bernard continued, his voice calm and measured. It should be noted that as of last month, Webb Industries' primary assets have been restructured. The company's intellectual property, patents, proprietary software, and core technologies have been transferred to the Marcus Webb Family Trust. Established in 1998 and amended substantially over the past 3 years, the room went silent. Victoria's smile froze. All physical assets, including office buildings, equipment, and infrastructure, are owned by Webb Holdings, LLC, which is wholly owned by the Marcus Webb Family Trust. Webb Industries maintains licensing agreements to use these assets. Agreements which can be terminated with 90 days notice by the trust's administrator. Bernard looked directly at me. The sole trustee and beneficiary of the Marcus Webb Family Trust is Marcus James Webb. Effectively, Marcus owns every asset of value associated with Webb Industries. The company itself is now primarily a licensing entity with minimal independent assets. I watched Victoria's face transform from triumph to confusion to rage. Her hands gripped the table edge so hard her knuckles went white. "That's impossible," she whispered. "That's fraud. He couldn't do that. He wouldn't." Every transfer was legal, properly documented, and filed with appropriate agencies, Bernard said calmly. Thomas Webb had every right as founder and majority shareholder to restructure corporate assets. All paperwork is in order. 3 independent law firms reviewed the structure for compliance. Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is theft." Marcus manipulated his father, took advantage of an aging man's grief, probably forged documents. "I'll have lawyers tear this apart piece by piece." "I'm 69 years old," Bernard said dryly. Thomas was 58. Neither of us qualified as aging or mentally compromised. Every document has timestamps, video recordings of signings, witnesses, and Thomas's clear verbal confirmation of his intentions. There are even audio recordings where he explicitly states he's protecting his legacy from potential future claims. He pulled out a tablet and pressed play. Dad's voice filled the room, strong and clear. "I, Thomas Robert Webb, being of sound mind and body, do hereby confirm that all asset transfers to the Marcus Webb Family Trust are made of my own free will, without coercion, and represent my desire to protect my son's inheritance and the company I built from my own hands." The recording continued for several minutes. Dad methodically detailing every major transfer, explaining his reasoning, confirming his mental competence. It was dated just 2 months before his death. When it ended, the silence was absolute. Victoria's face had gone from red to pale. Her sisters looked shocked. The board members shifted uncomfortably, clearly calculating what this meant for them. "You conniving little bastard," Victoria finally said, her polished facade completely shattered. "You manipulated him. You poisoned him against me. You stole a company that should have been mine. The company was never going to be yours," I said quietly, speaking for the first time. "It was always going to be mine. Dad built it for me. You knew that when you married him, and you spent 5 years trying to change it. You failed." She lunged toward me, and two board members had to physically restrain her. "I'll destroy you. I'll see you into oblivion. I'll expose every transaction as fraud. I'll have you arrested. Feel free to try," Bernard said, closing his folder. "Every document is available for review. Multiple law firms have confirmed legality. The structure is airtight. You can waste money on lawsuits if you wish, but you'll lose." Victoria didn't leave quietly. She screamed threats, claimed she'd go to the media, insisted the board would back her against me. But I could see the board members' faces. They were already calculating, already recognizing that their loyalty needed to shift. The company they thought they controlled was now essentially owned by me. Every patent, every piece of software, every valuable asset was mine. Web Industries without those assets was worthless. As the room cleared, Bernard pulled me aside. "Your father would be proud," he said quietly. "He was terrified she'd find a way to take everything from you. This structure ensures she can't touch any of it. What happens now?" I asked. "Now you decide what you want to do. You own the assets, but she controls the company that licenses them. You could revoke the licenses and watch the company collapse. You could demand she step down. You could negotiate a buyout. Or you could let her keep the CEO position and collect licensing fees while she runs an empty shell." I looked out the conference room window at the building where I'd grown up, where Dad had taught me everything. "I want to meet with the board," I said. "Tomorrow morning. Just me and them." The board meeting was tense. 8 members sat around the table, their faces careful and neutral. Victoria wasn't invited, though she tried to force her way in. Security had escorted her out, something that clearly shocked her. These were people she thought she'd won over completely. "Let's be clear about the situation," I said, standing at the head of the table. "As of right now, Web Industries licenses all its core assets from my family trust. Those license agreements can be terminated with 90 days' notice. Without those assets, this company has no products, no intellectual property, and no way to fulfill existing contracts." I paused, letting that sink in. "However, I don't want to destroy what my father built. I want to preserve it, grow it, make it stronger. But that can't happen with current leadership." I pulled out documents and slid them across the table. "These are my terms." Victoria Webb steps down as CEO immediately. She can keep her board seat if she wants, but she has no executive authority. I assume the role of CEO. The licensing agreements continue, but are renegotiated to ensure the trust receives fair market value for asset use. "Anyone who can't support this can resign." The board members looked at each other. Finally, the oldest member, a woman named Patricia Chen, who'd known Dad from the beginning, spoke. "Your father saw this coming, didn't he?" "He saw it coming from the day he married her," I said. "He hoped he was wrong, but he prepared in case he was right." And he was right. Patricia nodded slowly. "Thomas was brilliant. This structure, it's genius. Protecting the assets while maintaining corporate continuity. I'll vote for your proposal." One by one, the other board members agreed. They'd been swayed by Victoria's charm and political skills, but ultimately they were business people. They recognized who actually held power now, and it wasn't her. The vote was unanimous. By noon, I was CEO of Web Industries. By afternoon, Victoria's office was being cleared. She came one last time, escorted by security, to collect personal items. I watched from Dad's old office, now mine, as she threw files into boxes with angry, jerky movements. When she was done, she looked up at my window. Even from a distance, I could see the hatred in her eyes. She mouthed something that looked like this isn't over, but it was over. She just didn't want to accept it yet. That evening, I sat in the office as the sun set, surrounded by Dad's books and photos. Everything he'd built was secure now. Everything he'd wanted me to have was mine. Victoria didn't go quietly into the night. 3 days after being removed as CEO, she filed a lawsuit claiming I'd manipulated my father during a period of diminished capacity. She claimed emotional duress, undue influence, and a dozen other legal terms that basically meant she thought she deserved half of everything. The case was immediately thrown out. The evidence was overwhelming. Medical records showing Dad's perfect health. Psychological evaluations proving his mental clarity. Video recordings of him explicitly explaining his intentions. And testimony from multiple witnesses including Bernard and 3 other attorneys. The judge actually chastised Victoria's lawyer for wasting the court's time with a frivolous suit. She tried again with a different approach, claiming the asset transfers violated corporate law and shareholder rights. That case lasted longer, almost 3 months, before being dismissed with prejudice. The judge's ruling was clear. As founder and majority shareholder, Dad had every right to restructure assets as he saw fit. She tried going to the media, giving interviews about the theft of her late husband's company. A few outlets picked up the story, painting me as the ungrateful son who stole from his grieving stepmother. But our PR team was ready. We released carefully edited portions of the audio recordings. Not enough to reveal our full strategy, but enough to show Dad's clear intentions and his concerns about Victoria's motives. We released timeline documentation showing her systematic attempts to push me out of the company. We even found emails she'd sent to board members suggesting Dad was mentally declining. Emails sent while he was in perfect health. Public opinion shifted quickly. Suddenly, the narrative wasn't son steals from stepmother. It was gold digger attempts to steal company from rightful heir. Social media tore her apart. Think pieces appeared about the dangers of late-in-life marriages and protecting family businesses. Victoria became a cautionary tale. She disappeared from public view after that, moving to her sister's house in another state. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd burned through most of the money Dad left her on legal fees. The house had to be sold to cover her debts. She'd gone from nearly controlling a multi-million-dollar company to essentially broke in less than 6 months. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt relieved it was finally over. But I was wrong. It wasn't quite over yet. 6 months after taking over as CEO, I was working late when security called. "Mr. Webb, there's a Victoria Webb here demanding to see you. Should we call the police?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to refuse to have her escorted off the property. But curiosity won. Send her up. But stay close. She looked different when she walked into my office. The polish was gone, the designer clothes replaced with department store basics. She'd lost weight, her face gaunt and tired. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "What do you want, Victoria?" She sat without being invited, her hands twisting in her lap. "I want to make a deal. You have nothing I want. I have information. Things about your father you don't know. Things that might change how you see all of this." I leaned back in my chair. "I'm listening." She pulled out a worn envelope. "Letters. Between your father and me, from before we married. Things he told me about why he was really restructuring the company. It wasn't just about protecting you from me, Marcus. There were other threats. Other people trying to take control." I took the envelope cautiously, opening it while watching her face. Inside were printouts of emails dated from 5 years ago. I recognized Dad's email address. The messages were long, detailed, discussing corporate espionage attempts, hostile takeover threats from competitors, even concerns about certain board members being compromised. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Because I want you to know I wasn't the only threat. Yes, I wanted more control than I should have. Yes, I pushed too hard and tried to sideline you. But your father's paranoia about protecting the company, It started before I came along. I wasn't the cause. I was just convenient to blame. I read through the emails carefully. She was right. Dad had been worried about corporate threats for years. The structure he built with me wasn't just about protecting against Victoria. It was about protecting against everyone. What do you want in exchange for these? She looked around the office at the success that could have been partially hers if she'd played it differently. I want you to know I did love him. Not at first, maybe. At first, it was about security and status. But I did grow to love him. And watching him build walls between us because he trusted no one, it broke something in me. That's not an answer, I said. What do you want? Nothing, she said quietly. I just wanted you to know the truth. Your father was brilliant, but he was also deeply paranoid. Not without reason, but still. He saw threats everywhere. I became one of those threats in his mind. And once that happened, nothing I did could change it. She stood, moving toward the door. Keep the emails. They might help you understand him better. And Marcus, be careful. Just because he's gone doesn't mean the threats he worried about are gone too. She left. And I sat alone with the emails, reading them over and over. Dad had been fighting shadows long before Victoria appeared. He'd built the trust structure, the asset protection, the complicated corporate shields because he was terrified of losing control. Victoria had just been the most obvious target to focus on. But she was right about one thing. The other threats were still out there. And now they would be targeting me. Over the next few months, I strengthened every protection Dad had built. I hired security consultants, brought in corporate intelligence specialists, and reviewed every contract and agreement the company had. What I found shocked me. Dad had been right to be paranoid. 3 of our largest clients had been working with a competitor to steal our proprietary algorithms. 2 board members Patricia had been forced to replace were on the payroll of a company trying to organize a hostile takeover. Even some of our senior engineers had been approached with offers to share trade secrets. Dad had known about all of it, had been quietly documenting everything, building cases, preparing defenses. He died before he could act on most of it, leaving me with a hidden war I hadn't known was being fought. I spent 6 months cleaning house. We filed lawsuits against the corporate espionage attempts. We renegotiated contracts to include stronger protection clauses. We hired an entirely new security team and implemented monitoring systems Dad had designed but never installed. The company emerged stronger, more protected, more secure than ever. And I finally understood why Dad had been so insistent about the trust structure. It wasn't just about keeping assets from Victoria. It was about making sure that no matter what happened, no matter who tried to take control, the core of what he built would remain with someone he trusted, absolutely me. 3 years after Dad's death, Web Industries had doubled in value. We'd launched 2 new product lines, expanded into 5 new countries, and won contracts Dad had only dreamed of. I was sitting in my office one evening, reviewing quarterly reports, when my assistant buzzed me. Mr. Webb, there's someone here to see you. She says it's personal. I almost said no automatically. I'd learned to be cautious about unexpected visitors. Who is it? She says her name is Amanda Hayes. She's Bernard Hayes' daughter. Bernard had retired a year ago, handing over his practice to his children. I'd met Amanda a few times during the transition. She was sharp, detail-oriented, and had her father's gift for seeing 3 moves ahead in legal strategy. Sent her in. Amanda walked in looking nervous, carrying a locked briefcase. Marcus, I'm sorry to come without an appointment, but I found something in my father's files that you need to see immediately. She set the briefcase on my desk and opened it with a key from her necklace. Inside was a single folder marked Thomas Webb, final instructions. Dad was very specific. I was only supposed to give you this if and when you became CEO and successfully defended the company against any hostile actions. He said you'd know what that meant. I took the folder with trembling hands. Inside was a letter in Dad's handwriting. Marcus, if you're reading this, it means you've done what I hoped you could do. You've protected our company, probably fought off Victoria's attempts to claim what isn't hers, and hopefully started to understand why I built things the way I did. But there's one more thing you need to know. The letter went on for 3 pages detailing Dad's ultimate plan. The trust structure, the asset protection, all of it had been phase 1. Phase 2 was even more comprehensive. Dad had spent years developing a new security technology, something that would revolutionize corporate data protection. He'd kept it completely secret, not even filing patents, keeping all development off the books and out of web industries entirely. The prototypes and all development files are in a secure facility in Colorado. Location details and access codes are in this folder. This technology is worth more than everything Web Industries currently owns. It's yours now, Marcus. Not the company's, yours personally. Use it to ensure Web Industries remains independent, strong, and in family hands for generations. I sat back, stunned. Even from beyond the grave, Dad was still protecting me, still building my future. There's more, Amanda said quietly. She pulled out another document. Your father also established a secondary trust, one even Bernard didn't fully understand until recently. It contains enough assets to completely buy out every board member and outside shareholder if needed. He wanted you to have the option of taking Web Industries completely private if you ever felt public shareholders were a threat. You could do it tomorrow if you wanted. Just make offers they can't refuse and restructure as a fully private entity. I looked at the numbers. Dad had been setting aside money for over a decade, quietly building a war chest that could give me total control. Why didn't he just make it private himself? Because he wanted you to make that choice. He wanted you to experience building consensus, working with a board, learning leadership. But he also wanted you to have an escape route if things got too complicated. I thought about Victoria, about the corporate espionage attempts, about all the threats Dad had spent years fighting. How many people know about this secondary trust? Just me, my father, and now you. The trust documents are sealed. The assets are held through so many shell companies it would take years to trace them back to you. I made my decision quickly. Set up meetings with every shareholder. I'm making offers to buy them all out. Web Industries is going private within 3 months, Amanda smiled. Your father thought you might say that. He left a complete restructuring plan. Everything you need is in here. Taking Web Industries private was surprisingly easy. The offers were generous, well above market value. Most shareholders jumped at the chance to cash out. The few who hesitated were shown projections of how much control they'd lose under my leadership anyway. By 3 months later, I owned 100% of Web Industries. No board to answer to, no shareholders to please, no outside pressure to maximize short-term profits over long-term stability. Just me running the company Dad built, using the tools he'd left me. I made changes quickly. We implemented Dad's secret security technology, licensing it to other companies for massive profits while keeping the core innovation proprietary. We restructured operations to be leaner and more efficient. We promoted people based on merit and loyalty rather than politics. The company thrived. Within a year of going private, our valuation had increased by 40%. Within 2 years, we were the industry leader in 3 separate categories. I was 31 years old, running a multi-billion-dollar company, sitting on technology that could change industries, all because my father had spent years preparing me and protecting me. One evening, I stood in my office, looking out at the city. On my desk was a photo of Dad and me from when I was 16, both of us standing in front of the original Web Industries office. My phone buzzed. An email from an unknown address? Against my better judgment, I opened it. Marcus, this is Victoria. I saw the news about the company going private. Your father would be proud. I mean that sincerely. I've spent the last 2 years in therapy, working through my anger and regret. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I finally understand what your father was trying to protect. It wasn't just the company. It was you. The legacy he saw in you, the leader he knew you'd become. I was too blinded by my own ambitions to see it. I hope you're happy. I hope the company continues to thrive. And I'm sorry for the pain I caused you both. I stared at the email for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it, to dismiss it as manipulation. But something in the tone felt genuine. I didn't reply. Some wounds don't need words to heal, just time and distance. Instead, I looked back at the photo on my desk. We did it, Dad, I whispered. Everything you built, everything you fought to protect, it's secure. I promise I'll keep it that way. Outside, the city glittered with lights. Inside, I felt the weight of responsibility and the warmth of knowing I'd honored my father's trust. They tried to take everything from me. Victoria's manipulation, corporate espionage, hostile takeovers, even grief and doubt. But Dad had prepared me for all of it, building protections I didn't even know existed, teaching me lessons that only made sense years later. Web Industries was mine now, truly and completely. Not because I'd stolen it or manipulated anyone, but because my father had loved me enough to spend years ensuring no one could ever take it from me. That was his final gift, not just a company, but the knowledge that I was worthy of protecting it. And as I turned off the office lights and headed home, I carried that knowledge like armor against whatever challenges would come next. Because they would come. They always did. But now I was ready. Just like Dad knew I would be.